Private Sarah Turner stood at attention in front of the barracks, her boots clacking sharply on the concrete. The air was thick with tension, and every breath felt like it could be her last. Her hands trembled, not from fear of the drill sergeant, but from the weight of every eye in the room. "Private Turner!" Sergeant Miller's voice cut through the air like a whip, his glare sharp enough to cut stone. "Do you know why you're standing here looking like a lost puppy?" I said at attention, "Not looking like you're waiting for your mommy." The laughter from the rest of the recruits echoed off the walls. Sarah's face burned. She could feel their eyes on her, but she refused to flinch. She had been here for only 2 weeks, but already it felt like they could see every weakness in her past, her background, her lack of experience. She'd been called a lot of things in her life, but weak was the one that stung the most. "Why don't you make yourself useful for once, Turner?" Sergeant Miller barked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Pick up that mop and clean up the mess in the latrine, and do it like you've got some pride, not like you're slumming it in a high school janitor's closet." The room fell silent as Sarah stepped forward. Her boots scraped against the floor as she turned toward the latrine. But she didn't dare look up. She didn't need to see the eyes on her. She already knew what they were thinking. Just another weak recruit who didn't belong in this world of hardened soldiers. Sarah's fingers tightened around the handle of the mop as she started to clean, her eyes scanning the floor, watching the grime disappear into the swirling water. She could hear the muttered whispers behind her. Why's she even here? She can barely handle herself in a uniform. Someone's dad must have pulled some strings to get her in. No way she earned this. Bet she's gonna quit before the end of the week. The words dug into her chest like 100 needles. She wanted to shout back, tell them about the days she'd spent running the streets just to stay alive, about the nights she'd spent in the library because it was the only place that felt safe, about the promises she'd made to herself when she left home to prove she was worth something. But instead, she just scrubbed harder. The pain of the moment wasn't worth letting it show. There was one person who saw the quiet hurt in Sarah's eyes. Corporal Rachel Vasquez, one of the few who didn't laugh or sneer, when Sarah walked by. Rachel was no hero. She was quiet, tough, and smart. And she knew what it was like to feel small in a room full of people who couldn't be bothered to care. Rachel caught Sarah's eye for just a moment, her expression softening before she quickly turned away. It was nothing really, just a glance that said, "I see you." Sarah had come to this place to prove something, to herself mostly. She didn't need anyone else's validation. Not now, not ever. But it didn't make the sting of their judgment hurt any less. After what felt like hours, Sarah finished cleaning the latrine. Her hands ached, her back screamed, but she didn't dare let it show. As she headed back to the barracks, she could still feel the eyes on her, like everyone was waiting for her to break. She didn't. That night, as the recruits lined up in the mess hall, the insults started again. Sarah tried to blend into the wall, keeping her head down, but she could hear the familiar whispers from the guys at the far end of the table. "Private Turner probably doesn't even know what real work is. She's just here because she's got something to prove. Think she's going to make it through the next few weeks? I give her a day, maybe 2. Bet you $5 she quits." Sarah's jaw tightened. The noise around her blurred as she pushed her food around on her plate, trying to ignore it all. But the feeling of being so small, so invisible in a room full of loud, confident soldiers, was overwhelming. The mess hall grew quieter as Sergeant Miller walked in, his boots clicking with authority as he surveyed the room. His eyes landed on Sarah. "Private Turner, why don't you take the first shift on KP duty?" he called out, his voice carrying across the room. "Maybe you'll learn how to earn your food for once." Laughter erupted from the table. Sarah's face flushed, but she stood up, grabbing her tray with hands that suddenly felt far too heavy. She walked toward the kitchen, the noise of the mess hall still echoing in her ears. Just as she reached the door, she heard Rachel's voice, low but clear. "Ignore them. You're not here to prove anything to them. You're here to prove it to yourself." Sarah didn't respond, but the weight in her chest lightened just a little. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe those words might be true. When she got to the kitchen, she was handed a pile of dirty pans. She set to work quietly, scraping the last remnants of food off the metal, her hands moving methodically. The feeling of being alone in that moment wasn't as suffocating as before. It felt manageable, like a space she could control, even if the rest of the world thought she was just a joke. By the time her shift ended, the barracks had gone quiet, and Sarah was exhausted in every sense of the word. She slid into her cot, staring up at the ceiling. For the first time since she'd stepped onto the base, she didn't feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her. It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't invisible. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the thought that something was building inside her, something that wouldn't let her give up. What she didn't know yet was that she was closer to discovering it than anyone could have predicted. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. Sarah's boots hit the ground with a sharp, rhythmic thud as she jogged through the rain, her breath coming in ragged bursts. The drill sergeant's orders echoed in her ears, demanding she keep pace with the rest of the squad. The water soaked through her jacket, the cold creeping into her bones, but she didn't dare stop. "Private Turner," Sergeant Miller's voice sliced through the storm. "Pick up the pace. You call this running? You're dragging the whole squad down." The rest of the group surged ahead, their footsteps creating a chorus of crunching gravel, while Sarah's legs felt heavier with every step. She could hear the others muttering behind her, the sneers in their voices unmistakable. "Bet she won't last the week. She's slowing us down. We're gonna fail because of her." It was the same every time. Every run, every drill, they all whispered behind her back. And Sarah? She just kept moving. There was no other choice. The rain didn't stop. It only poured harder. It was as if the storm was trying to beat her into submission. And for a moment, she wondered if it would. The cold was unbearable, the weight of her own body dragging her down. But the words kept pushing her forward. "Don't stop. Keep moving." Eventually, the squad finished the run. Sarah was the last to cross the finish line, her muscles screaming in protest. Sergeant Miller stood there, arms crossed, a smug look on his face. "Nice job, Turner. You just barely made it. You think that was good enough? You think this is how you're going to make it through this training?" He didn't even wait for her to answer, turning on his heel and walking away. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained impassive. The same routine, the same humiliation. But this time, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a feeling of defeat. No, this time, it was something else. After the run, the rest of the squad filtered into the chow hall. As usual, Sarah grabbed her tray and found an empty spot at the far end of the room. The sounds of clattering trays and loud conversations filled the air. But she was used to the silence around her, used to being invisible. But today, it felt different. "You think you belong here, Turner?" A voice sneered from behind her. Sarah turned to find Jake Stone, one of the more vocal and arrogant members of the squad, standing with his friends. "Yeah," another voice chimed in. "You're just wasting space. You don't belong here with us. This isn't a charity." They laughed. The rest of the squad had grown quiet, all eyes on Sarah, waiting for her to shrink, to back down. But Sarah didn't. Not this time. She set her tray down, her hands steady, and met Jake's eyes. "I'm here because I earned it," she said, her voice low but clear. "And if you don't like it, you can deal with it." The room fell silent. Jake's smirk faltered for a moment, but then he leaned in, his voice lowering into a mockery. "Earned it? You've barely got the basics down, Turner. You're lucky they didn't kick you out already." Sarah's jaw tightened. She stood up slowly, not allowing the rush of anger to control her. She turned her back on him, picking up her tray, but she could hear them muttering behind her. "Stupid idiot. Thinks she's got what it takes. I give her a day, tops." The words stung, but she didn't let them show. She took a seat in the corner of the mess hall and ate her meal in silence, the weight of the whispers pressing against her chest. That night, after lights out, Sarah lay awake in her cot, staring up at the ceiling. The barracks were eerily quiet except for the faint sound of breathing around her. She could hear the occasional rustle as someone shifted, but all she could think about was what had happened in the chow hall. "They're right." The thought gnawed at her. "Maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the doubt creeping into her mind. the harshness of Sergeant Miller's words, the mocking voices of her squad mates. It was too much. But then she remembered something, a conversation from her first day at boot camp before the ridicule started. Rachel Vasquez had pulled her aside and said, "It doesn't matter what they think. What matters is that you keep pushing. You've got something inside you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Rachel's words echoed in Sarah's head, louder than the taunts or the laughter. She wasn't here to make anyone like her. She was here to prove to herself that she could do this. The next morning, Sergeant Miller's voice sliced through the air again as they lined up for morning drills. Sarah could feel the eyes of the others on her, but she didn't let it bother her. She focused on the task at hand. "Private Turner," Sergeant Miller barked, "let's see if you can keep up today. Don't fall behind again." She squared her shoulders and nodded. The drill began, a grueling series of push-ups, sprints, and obstacle courses. The squad was in sync, but Sarah was still struggling to keep up. Her muscles burned, her chest heaved with every breath, but she kept moving. Halfway through the course, her foot slipped on the muddy incline. She tried to catch herself, but her legs gave way, and she fell hard on her side. The squad, already ahead, didn't even look back. But then Rachel's voice broke through. "Private Turner, get up! Come on, get up!" It wasn't much, but it was something. Rachel wasn't laughing. She wasn't mocking her. She was encouraging her. Sarah pushed herself up, ignoring the sting in her side. She wasn't going to let this be the moment she quit. The rest of the course was a blur. Every obstacle felt like a mountain, every step a struggle. But Sarah didn't stop. She kept her eyes forward, determined to finish. When she finally crossed the finish line, she was gasping for air, covered in mud and trembling from exhaustion. "Private Turner," Sergeant Miller's voice boomed. "You made it, just barely." He looked her over, his face tight with disapproval. "You're lucky you didn't get left behind." Sarah didn't say anything. She was too tired to respond, but she was also too proud to show him how much his words hurt. As the rest of the squad gathered around, Sarah caught Rachel's eyes. There was no mockery, no judgment, just a nod of respect. And in that moment, Sarah realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore. The journey wasn't over, but something had shifted inside her. She wasn't going to stop, not now, not ever. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to prove something to herself. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. It was the day of the final field exercise, the one that would decide if any of them were cut from the program. Everyone was on edge, but Sarah? She was different now. The sting of every insult, every belittling remark, had hardened into something deeper. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something more dangerous, the resolve to prove them all wrong. Sergeant Miller gathered the squad in the briefing area, his voice cutting through the chatter. "This is it, soldiers. You've got one shot to prove you belong. No excuses." His eyes slid over Sarah, briefly pausing before moving on to the others. She felt the weight of his gaze, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. The mission was simple. A reconnaissance mission deep into the training area. It was supposed to be a test of strategy, physical endurance, and teamwork. Nothing Sarah couldn't handle. But as soon as the words left Miller's mouth, Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew this wouldn't be like the other exercises. She could feel the tension in the air, a ticking clock, ready to blow. The squad moved out, the trees looming ahead like silent sentinels. The dense forest swallowed them whole, the path marked by nothing but the occasional trail of disturbed leaves and broken branches. It was quiet at first, too quiet. The only sound was the shuffle of boots against the forest floor and the occasional crack of a twig underfoot. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to stay focused, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. She glanced over at her squad mates, noticing how tense they were. Every so often, she caught a glimpse of their eyes, quick, calculating, and then they'd look away. Her breath hitched when she saw Jake Stone up ahead, muttering to one of his buddies. "If Turner messes this up, I swear." His voice trailed off, but the intent was clear. He didn't think she belonged here. And the rest of the squad, despite their silence, felt the same way. But Sarah couldn't focus on that. She had a mission. The plan was simple. Locate the target, report back with the coordinates, and make it back in one piece. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, the feeling of unease grew. They were being watched. It started small, faint sounds. In the distance, the rustle of leaves just outside their line of sight. Then a sudden crack. "Down!" Miller barked. Everyone dropped to the ground instinctively, scrambling for cover. Sarah's heart slammed in her chest. She could hear the sounds now, the unmistakable shuffle of boots, the low whispers of the enemy, closing in. "Where are they?" Rachel hissed beside her, her voice tense. Sarah didn't answer. She was already moving, sliding through the underbrush toward the sound. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't instinct. It was something else. She could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't a drill anymore. She crouched low just beyond the tree line and spotted them, two enemy combatants, their silhouettes barely visible against the darkening trees. Without thinking, Sarah took aim, her finger steady on the trigger. And then she hesitated. Not because she was afraid to shoot. She wasn't. But because this wasn't just about surviving. This was about proving to herself that she was more than what they saw. More than just the girl they'd laughed at. In the split second of that hesitation, she saw something she didn't expect. One of the enemy soldiers was looking directly at her, his eyes widening in recognition. He made a move, and before Sarah could pull the trigger, there was a flash of movement. Jake Stone lunged forward, knocking the enemy soldier to the ground, silencing him with a swift strike. "Get down, Turner," he shouted, his voice harsh. "You're not alone in this." The moment lasted a heartbeat. Sarah blinked, momentarily stunned. Jake Stone? Helping her? She snapped back to reality, diving behind a fallen log as the rest of the squad engaged. The firefight erupted in chaos, gunshots ringing through the air. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, the fear sharp but oddly exhilarating. But she didn't freeze. She moved with purpose. The hesitation from earlier had disappeared, replaced by clarity. Sarah ran to cover another member of the squad, offering a hand up when they stumbled. She shouted orders, helping coordinate their movements as if she'd done this her whole life. The squad was in full motion now, but the enemy wasn't letting up. Gunfire continued to pierce the air, and Sarah's heartbeat thudded in her ears. She saw Rachel at the front, ducking low, taking out a target with precision. In that moment, something clicked. Sarah was no longer just a bystander in her own story. She was a soldier. Then it happened. The moment that would change everything. Sergeant Miller's voice boomed through their comms. "This is it. The target's within reach. We need coordinates now." But just as Sarah was about to call in their position, a soldier from their own squad, a guy named Thomas, fired his weapon, his shot going wild. The sound of the bullet echoed in the forest. It was a mistake, an accident, but it didn't matter. In that split second, everything fell apart. "God damn it, Thomas," Miller screamed, his fury palpable. "What the hell are you doing?" But before Miller could do anything, the real threat emerged. Another enemy squad ambushed them from the right. The sound of boots slapping against the ground, the crack of rifles being fired. It was a moment of complete chaos. And in the confusion, the worst happened. Jake Stone, who had been so quick to help Sarah earlier, froze. He panicked, his eyes wide with fear as the enemy closed in. Sarah saw him take a hesitant step back, and in that instant, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let him fail. Not today, not in front of everyone. With no thought for her own safety, Sarah charged forward, her rifle raised, taking out an enemy soldier with a swift shot. The rest of the squad was right behind her, following her lead as she broke through the ambush. And when the dust finally cleared, the battlefield was eerily still. The enemy had been driven back, but the squad had suffered losses. Thomas was injured and others were shaken. But Sarah, she was standing tall, no longer a liability. Sergeant Miller approached, his face a mixture of frustration and respect. He didn't say anything at first, but the way he looked at her spoke volumes. "Well," he said, his voice low, "I guess I was wrong about you, Private Turner." Sarah didn't respond. She just nodded, her chest tight with emotion. Later that evening, as they huddled around a campfire, Rachel leaned in close, her voice a whisper. "You did good out there." Sarah didn't say anything, but as she sat back, letting the warmth of the fire seep into her skin, she couldn't help but feel a sense of something new, something powerful. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was her proving who she really was. And in that moment, Sarah Turner knew she wasn't just another recruit. She was a soldier. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick fog hanging over the base as Sarah stood at attention in front of the squad. It was the aftermath of the most intense mission they had ever been on. The squad had barely made it back in one piece, but they were here, and Sarah was no longer the person they'd once ridiculed. She was a soldier, one who had faced the storm and emerged unbroken. But not everyone saw it that way. "Private Turner," Sergeant Miller's voice rang out, sharp and unforgiving. "You're lucky you didn't get us killed today. That stunt you pulled with the enemy? Who the hell do you think you are?" His words struck like a hammer, pounding down on Sarah's chest. The rest of the squad stood around her, their eyes a mixture of confusion and disbelief. It was a moment she'd dreamed of, finally proving herself, and now Miller was questioning her every move. "I did what needed to be done," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Miller glared at her, his face twisted with disdain. "You think you can just act on your own? You're part of a team, Turner, not a goddamn lone wolf." He was right. Sarah knew it. But in that moment, it didn't matter. She'd acted on instinct, on years of training and survival. She couldn't let him see that. She wouldn't let him see it. The rest of the squad watched in silence, the tension palpable. Every word out of Miller's mouth seemed to tear away the confidence Sarah had built. Was it all for nothing? "Private Stone, take over the debrief," Miller ordered, his voice dismissive. "I'll deal with Turner later." Jake Stone stepped forward, his eyes flicking to Sarah for only a second before he turned his attention to the rest of the squad. "All right, listen up," he began, his voice clipped. "Miller's right. We're a team. We don't act without orders. Got it?" Sarah's jaw clenched, her fists tightening at her sides. She wasn't a fool. She saw the way Jake looked at her now, like she was a liability, like she wasn't good enough. "You okay, Private?" Rachel's voice broke through her thoughts. Sarah looked over at Rachel, whose eyes were soft but filled with concern. There was no mockery in Rachel's tone, just genuine worry. But it didn't help. Not this time. "I'm fine," Sarah muttered, her gaze drifting to the floor. She didn't want to talk about it. Not now. The rest of the day passed in a blur. The squad went through routine drills, but Sarah felt disconnected, like she was moving through the motions without truly being present. Each time she looked around, she could feel the weight of their judgment. Even Rachel, her quiet ally, seemed distant. By the time they gathered for evening chow, Sarah could barely stomach the food in front of her. The mess hall buzzed with chatter, but all she could hear were the whispered comments, the low laughs, the distant voices she couldn't escape. Turner's lucky Miller didn't have her kicked out. Don't know why she even tries. She's not cut out for this. The voices were getting louder now, the ridicule stronger. She hated it, hated how they saw her. But more than that, she hated how she let it affect her. "Enough!" Rachel's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Sarah looked up, surprised. Rachel wasn't known for confrontation, but there she was, standing tall, facing the rest of the squad. "We don't talk like that. You all know how hard she's been pushing. This is what she signed up for. This is what we signed up for. All of us." The squad went silent, their eyes darting between Rachel and Sarah. No one spoke for a moment, but Sarah could see the shift. Rachel's words had made a difference. Rachel's gaze softened as she looked back at Sarah, but there was still a lingering sadness there, like even she knew it wouldn't be enough to stop the storm brewing. After chow, Sarah found herself back in her cot, staring at the ceiling. The barracks were quieter than usual. She could hear the others talking softly, but it all felt far away, like she was hearing them through a thick wall. And then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the aisle. "Private Turner." It was Miller. Sarah didn't move, didn't acknowledge him. She knew what was coming. "I've been thinking about today," Miller continued, his voice low. "You've got potential. I'll give you that, but you need to learn to follow orders. The team's only as strong as its weakest link. He paused, but Sarah didn't look up. You're not the weakest link anymore, he said, almost like he was admitting something to himself. But you still have a long way to go. Sarah didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear it, but before she could respond, Miller was gone, his footsteps fading into the distance. She lay in the dark, her mind racing. Miller had acknowledged her strength, but he hadn't really seen her. Not yet. The next morning, the squad gathered in the briefing room for their final debrief of the mission. The tension was thick in the air, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. As Miller spoke, his tone was almost approving, but there was still that edge, that hint of judgment that kept Sarah at arm's length. She stood at the back of the room, listening to the others offer their reports, but she wasn't really there. She was back in the forest, reliving every moment. You did good, Private Turner, Rachel said quietly, stepping beside her as the meeting ended. You should be proud of what you did out there. Sarah turned to her, forcing a small smile. Yeah, I guess. Rachel didn't push. She just nodded and walked off, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts.